The Santa Cruz Chameleon has been in Santa Cruz's lineup for a very long time in various different iterations. Last year we saw a new version of the Chameleon come, and there's both carbon and aluminium options of this do-it-all trail hardtail. This bike is designed for everything from regular trail riding up to bike packing, and there's a number of features that allow you to do that. But I'm using this bike as an all-round, in the woods, playing around little trail bike. As with a number of hardtails these days, you can spec the bike with either plus tyres, 27 by 2.8, or 29ers. I've got the Chameleon C SE Plus. Now this means that it's got a carbon frame set with the C level carbon, not the super spendy CC, which isn't offered for the Chameleon, and it comes with the SE Plus build. So this is a low to mid-ish range build along with their reserve carbon wheels in that plus 2.8 inch format. What allows you to swap between the two is a little swing link by the rear dropout, so you can adjust the chain stays and therefore the geometry a little bit to fit in 29er hoops, and the fork is compatible with plus wheels and 29-inch wheels too. I've been riding this bike for a couple of months now, and it is actually going to be my BikeRadar long-term bike for a whole year. At the moment it's pretty much stock, although I have played around with a couple of little things, but we're going to talk about the stock version of this bike in this video. We'll get the elephant out of the room first and foremost. This bike, a hardtail, cost £5,700 in the UK, and that is an astonishing amount of money, especially when you consider the spec. So let's talk about the spec, and then we'll talk about the geometry, how it rides, and then we'll talk about my long-term plans with this bike. Santa Cruz offer a number of their carbon frames in this C or the CC version. The CC version costs more and weighs less, but they say that the strength and stiffness is the same between the two frames. They don't offer the Chameleon in a CC frame set, at least at the moment. The fork is a Fox 34 performance level version with 130mm of travel and a grip damper, so it is, other than the Rhythm 34, the most basic regular 34 you can get. The drivetrain is predominantly SRAM GX Eagle, so you get a 10 to 50 tooth cassette, but you do get a stylo carbon crankset up front, so that adds a little bit of bling to the bike. The wheels are relatively fancy. You get a pair of Hope Pro 4 hubs, and these are built into a pair of Reserve 37 rims. As the name suggests, the internal width of these rims is 37mm, and that gives a fair bit of width to support the pair of Maxxis Recon Plus 2.8 inch tyres. Hope also supply the colour-coded headset, which is a nice little touch. There's a sort of a brown and turquoise theme going on with my version of the bike, and the cockpit is largely provided by Raceface, and you get an effect bar and an effect stem too. Finishing off the cockpit are some Santa Cruz Palmdale grips. Now, if you watched my recent video on my favourite all-time good value bits of kit, you'll notice that these grips are in there, so I'm pretty happy with that. Further back into the middle of the bike, you've got a RockShox Reverb drop post with 150mm of drop, and on top of that is a WTB Silverado saddle. Completing the whole package is the brakes, and they're a pair of SRAM Guide Rs. So the Guide R isn't the most powerful version of the Guide out there. It doesn't have the swing link in the lever. So as you can tell, the spec level on this bike, well, it isn't amazing, is it? As we've come to see from a number of Santa Cruz frames recently, the frame is finished really nicely. There's obviously been plenty of attention to detail in building this bike. Cables are internally routed, but there's absolutely no rattling, and it seems pretty easy to route those cables through it. On the down tube there is some protection for the carbon, and there's also 3 bosses under the down tube, and that is to put those sort of anything cages. So if you're going to go bike packing, that's a good place you can stow a load of luggage. Inside the frame there's 2 sets of bottle bosses too, so you can pack plenty of water should you wish. Then at the back is those swinging dropouts. So predominantly it's there so you can swap between the 650B Plus and the 29-inch wheels. It also gives you a tiny bit of adjustment on the geometry if there's room with your tyres. The other thing that it will allow you to do is run this bike single speed without having to run a chain tensioner. Talk about that later on. I've been riding the bike now for probably 2 or 3 months, and it's actually been one of the most ridden bikes I've ridden in those 2 or 3 months. A lot of my riding has been local woodsy stuff, so finding relatively gentle to reasonably steep, flowy, fast terrain with some berms, a few little jumps, that sort of thing. And it's been great there. I've also ridden it on a number of trail centres, Cody Brennan for example, which is a classic one in the UK. It's quite rocky there. Now the Chameleon obviously is a hardtail, and you can definitely ride hardtails in a wide range of places. I'm not ever going to say that you can't ride a hardtail there, it doesn't work. On rocky, lumpy, bumpy single track, the Chameleon is far harder work than a full suspension bike. And if I'm honest, I didn't really enjoy my ride around the rough, rocky, relentlessly bumpy Cody Brennan on this bike. I've ridden it on hardtails before and it has been fine, and it is fine, but I've also ridden it on full suspension bikes and it's better on a full sus. However, on those fast, flowy, bermy, fun little woodland tracks, the Santa Cruz is hilarious. It is genuinely one of the most fun bikes I've ever ridden around there. I've got bikes in my garage that are, got loads of travel here or loads of tech there and really fancy bits of kit. I still go back to the Chameleon though, because it is so much fun. Now, one of the sort of issues, I guess, with this particular bike is that front tyre. Now, the Recon is a fast rolling, low treaded plus tyre with plenty of volume. A lot of the tracks that I'm riding, and don't forget I live in the UK and not California, well, they're made out of mud and wet roots. And the Recon, especially on the front, doesn't offer a huge amount of grip. So in the world of mullet bikes, we've seen it all going on in the downhill world, and we're seeing it on a number of trail bikes now. I have stuck a 29er front wheel in there because I can. Now I know there's all these bandwagons that everyone seems to be doing it all over the media. I was doing it months ago, okay? So don't call me a bandwagon jumper because I've been doing it for a while. So I've kept the plus tyre at the back for one reason. Mostly it's a hardtail, and when you're hitting those stumps, those roots, those jumps, it is a little bit harsh, so having that 2.8-inch rubber in the back gives that little bit of compliance that just helps you keep flowing. It's not that I'm soft, but when you've got a really jarring ride, like you sometimes get with a hardtail, it's harder to maintain your flow over those tracks. So I've kept the plus tyre in the back just to give that little extra bit of compliance. Up front, what I've done is stuck another carbon wheel, a Crank Brothers Synthesis front wheel, which is known to be actually quite soft, with a 2.5-inch Maxxis Shorty on there. Now this is a really pointy, sticky winter mud tyre, and it means there is a bucket load of grip at the front of this bike, and that has made it utterly hilarious. Now most of the photos you'll see of this bike in this video is of the stock build, and that's because I'm reviewing it for MBUK magazine as a stock bike. However, a little bit of the video footage has got that 29er front wheel in it, and most of my riding has had that 29 front wheel in it too. If I was going to own this bike forever, or if I was going to buy this bike, I would be putting a 29er front wheel in there. Or at the very least, if I was going to keep the 27 Plus vibe going, it'd be a Minion up front. And I think possibly Santa Cruz could have spec'd a slightly more aggressive front tyre for this bike, because it is so much fun. And you can push it into things, you can ride it real hard. So let's talk about that price, because we've touched on it earlier on, and it is frankly slightly ridiculous. I did a few sums and I got the RRPs of every individual component for that bike. There's always some variations, but I'm pretty sure I got it 99% right. The bike in the UK is priced at £5,700. I summed it up as being £5,236 worth of kit. What's going on with that? Who knows? I really like this bike. As you can tell, I genuinely ride it when I could ride any other bike that's in the garage. I love it. But I'm not going to recommend you go and buy it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to recommend that you go and buy the frame if you want a sort of high-end trail carbon hardtail and you've got a fair bit of cash to drop, because the frame's about £1,400, which is quite a lot, but it isn't super ridiculous. I recommend you buy that frame and buy some different components, or buy the components that you want, because for £5,700, I'll take the carbon wheels that they provide, but I want a factory level fork. I want I want Access Eagle, not GX Eagle. I want the top end stuff for that kind of money. And I reckon with a bit of shrewd buying, you could get a real top end bike for £5,700 based around this carbon frame. So there you have it. I really like the bike, and I really think if you want this kind of bike, you should consider buying it, but just don't buy the stock version because it's an absolute rip-off. I'm really sorry. As I mentioned, this is my long-term bike for BikeRadar, so I'll be riding it for the next year or so. When I was at uni, I rode single speeds pretty much for the entire 4 years of my course, and I really enjoyed it. So I think I'm going to drop some spacers on the hub and run it single speed for a bit, just to see what it's like, see if my legs are still strong enough to cope with all of that. If I do go single speed, I'm probably going to fit some super wide bars for all the leverage up the hills. It could be a pretty pimpy little single speed, I reckon, by the end of it. It's not too heavy now, it's going to get even lighter and I think even nicer. The bike is also going to be my test bed for a number of products. I've got some suspension forks coming up to test. I've got the Mazzocchi Bomber Z2, they're pretty new, pretty cheap, relatively speaking, they're quite nice. And I've also got a fancy pair of Öhlins RXF 34s, so look out for reviews of those on BikeRadar in the future. Keep an eye out on BikeRadar for more long-term reports over the next few months. What do you think in the comments? I'm sure the comments are going to be absolutely aflame with hate for the price for this bike, and I get that, but please, honestly, it's a really, really good bike. Let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and click the little bell button because then you'll get notifications of all of BikeRadar's videos.